John Oliver just made a show about UFOs! I am beside myself. John Oliver's UFO episode was actually better than I expected.
This is an area where it is easy to fall into one of two camps.
Check.
Hardcore skeptics who roll their eyes at the whole subject, and true believers who are convinced everything has a fantastical explanation.
Well, I don't think I'm in either of those camps. I'm just here for the science, whether the explanation ends up being fantastical or not.
You will see in comments below this piece on YouTube those two groups fighting it out over everything I've said here and only agreeing on the fact that I am a fucking idiot.
Well, I might end up joining that consensus. Let's watch.
Lots of people have reported seeing UFOs, from Kesha to Russell Crowe to even this guy.
I was with about 20 other men, and we saw a bright light appear in the distant western skies, and it got closer and closer, and when it was just above the treetops, it changed color, and then it stayed there for a while, and then it disappeared into the distance. And none of us could ever imagine what it was.
Okay, that was his big setup for the episode. The President of the United States,
Jimmy Carter, saw a UFO. And while skeptics pushed back, saying that it was probably a space cloud or Venus...
Hold on, go back. A what?
It was probably a space cloud.
A space cloud on Earth. Did you just make that up? I don't think that's a thing, but okay. Venus is a thing.
Carter doubled down, saying, "We know what Venus looks like. It was not Venus."
So here, he's quoting from Carter's appearance on the Skeptics Guide to the Universe podcast in 2007. At that time, the mystery remained unsolved. Carter insisted that it wasn't Venus, but still had no idea what it was.
And I still don't know what it was.
But what if I told you that 9 years later, that very same podcast reported the mystery solved with conclusive evidence? You'd probably say, well, we all know the formula for a John Oliver episode. He opens with some kind of weird cliffhanger, then veers off topic into a million tangents about the Pringles man's body or marrying a cabbage, and then at the end, he takes that story you've almost forgotten about by now and does something cool that brings it all to a satisfying conclusion. So, obviously, John Oliver's going to end his show with that big reveal of Jimmy Carter's mystery, right? Well, let's keep going and find out.
When it comes to UFOs, belief doesn't really come into it. Whatever they are, people are seeing them. That poster in Mulder's office shouldn't have said, "I want to believe." It should have said, "Believe schmelieve." What the fuck is that thing?
It's an illustration on a poster about belief, which definitely does come into it. This poster is about wanting to believe that this thing, if we had a better picture of it, would turn out to be not just this thing, like those killjoy skeptics want, but this thing that the true believers want. And what I want is for somebody, somewhere in the world, with the millions and millions of HD cameras that everyone carries around in their pocket, to just snap one photo of a UFO that isn't a grainy gray blob. Speaking of which...
This mysterious black object spotted off the coast of San Diego by Navy fighter pilots in 2004.
My God.
Wow.
That's the famous gimbal video, which has been thoroughly studied and analyzed, for example, in this detailed breakdown by Mick West, which uses trigonometry, the science of optics, aircraft data, and 3D modeling to demonstrate that the video is actually not a picture of a saucer-shaped object, but an oval-shaped glare in the lens of the infrared camera. It appears to rotate because the gimbal-mounted camera is turning, and the apparent speed is due to parallax with the clouds. What the video almost certainly shows is the hot engine of a jet moving away. The heat makes it appear black to the infrared sensor. The aura around it is a normal image sharpening artifact, and the shape of the real object can't be seen at all due to the glare. Cool, now let's take a look at John Oliver's breakdown.
Wow. I don't know what's more surprising there, the UFO or the pilot responding to it with, "My gosh." In that situation, I might have gone with "Holy living shit" or "Jesus backflipping Christ," but I guess credit to him for keeping it G-rated. There might be kids watching this Navy footage.
And that's it. What, were you hoping for more? That was his entire analysis of the gimbal video. You know, I guess he just doesn't have time to go into it, since he's too busy talking about how he'd like to have sex with pelicans, or how the UFO-shaped McDonald's in Roswell is underrated, or how he can't find his pet snake.
I definitely know where my snake is.
That, you see, is his metaphor for why the military might be covering up the fact that it doesn't know what these UFOs are. Instead of admitting to not knowing what the hell you're doing...
You do have to project a certain level of authority and control.
Gee, good thing only the military does that and not late-night comedians. You know, another thing he forgets to mention is that some of these photos are just plain impossible to identify. They're simply too small and blurry to make out any kind of detail. It's called the low information zone, which kind of sounds like a game. Let's play. The low information zone. See if you can identify these easily recognizable objects. Number 1, this picture is obviously a pelican. Number 2, that of course is the Roswell McDonald's. And number 3, it's a snake! John, I found your snake. He just wants the pelican. Then, he talks about how the military has a long history of covering up things it does know about. And to be fair, he does a better job here, possibly because he just copies word for word a documentary from ABC in which they explain that the crash balloon in Roswell was part of a classified high-altitude nuclear detection program called Project Mogul. And when locals found the balloon debris in their yard and wondered what it was, the military couldn't tell them, because that's what the word classified means. You're not allowed to tell people about it. And even though it was declassified in 1997, there are still true believers out there who want to think it was something more than just a military balloon, and John isn't above a little pandering to that crowd.
It is hard to take the government's word for it, given that they just admitted they've been lying for 50 years.
Okay, now if you're one of those folks, I'm not asking you to trust the military, or John Oliver, or even me. How about trusting your own 2 eyes and common sense? If you look past the hype and the merchandising and the fast food cash grabs, go back to the source. Here are the original photos of the Roswell crash and the first-hand account of the original person who discovered it. He described what he found as, quote, tinfoil, paper, tape, and sticks. And ask yourself, is that really the makings of an intergalactic spaceship? Next, he goes through the history of military investigations, Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book, and then he talks about the University of Colorado UFO Project, aka
the Condon Committee, led by physicist Edward Condon. But even while it was underway, there were signs that it wasn't exactly being conducted in a spirit of free inquiry.
What? How so? The committee was a multidisciplinary group of scientists all selected because they had no preconceived opinions about UFOs. Anyone biased one way or the other was not allowed on the committee. They spent 2 years investigating thousands of UFO sightings and openly shared their results. How is that not free inquiry?
Condon was a respected scientist, but was hardly impartial about UFOs. Before the study even began, he said in a speech, "There's nothing to it." He later wrote, "The authors of UFO books should be horsewhipped."
The scientific method doesn't go 1, hypothesis, 2, horsewhip anyone who disagrees with you, 3, conclusion. You're thinking of religion.
Okay, it's a funny joke. Except, John's news source got their facts wrong, and his diligent fact-checkers missed it. First of all, 1967 was after the study began in '66, so if Condon was impartial going into the project, he certainly started to form opinions after sifting through all those UFO reports. Which brings us to the second quote, which isn't a quote at all. I know this because I had to pay $30 for a copy of the original article. It turns out research isn't cheap, so if you enjoy this show, please subscribe and click the like button. It's free and it really helps. And if you do have a spare $1 or 2, please consider supporting me on Patreon so I can continue obsessively paying for stuff like this to share with you. UFOs I Have Loved and Lost, in which Condon reflects on his adventures aboard the committee. He describes his initial enthusiasm that finding extraterrestrials would be an epic discovery that he would be quite happy to make. Then came the disappointment as his evidence that they were looking for just couldn't be found. Like any good scientist, he set up a control group, people who saw identified flying objects, such as the atmospheric re-entry of the Zond 4 rocket, which was observed by hundreds of people on March 3, 1968. Some of whom didn't know what it was and reported it as a UFO. In comparing these reports, he found there is an extraordinary disagreement among the descriptions of what was seen by different observers of the same event. Yeah, kind of a problem. At least most eyewitnesses are just making honest mistakes, but he also encountered a different type of person, and this is where he started to lose his cool. Here's just one example. I was visited several times by a man who claimed to be an agent for the third universe. The nice man explained that we're in the first universe and the second is inhabited by beings that resemble polar bears. The third universe was offering to teach us how to build interstellar flying saucers for the low price of $3 billion with a modest down payment of only $3,000 by direct deposit, please. Yeah, I don't know why an advanced alien civilization would need US dollars or have a bank account in Colorado, but these are the sorts of con artists Condon and his committee had to deal with on a regular basis, and that's who he wanted to horsewhip. Not anyone who disagrees with him, but anyone who sold lies and scammed others for money. And the actual quote is that they should, on being found guilty, be publicly horsewhipped and forever banned from further activity in these usually honorable professions. Truth and children's minds are too precious for us to allow them to be abused by charlatans. So, I don't know the guy personally and whether he literally meant horsewhip scammers or if that was just his way of saying that he was pissed off with them. But his point was that the public's scientific literacy is low, charlatans and pseudoscientists are making things worse and should be stopped, because we need better quality education to teach children the scientific method. The real one. He was advocating for the opposite of that.
Other scientists at the time, including Carl Sagan, pushed back on the tone of Condon's report.
Okay, citation? Quote? What exactly did Carl Sagan say to criticize the report? Because he certainly agreed with its scientific conclusions. And I think it's really too bad that this was the one and only mention Carl Sagan got in a show about UFOs, because he wrote probably the best book I've ever seen on the subject. In this book, he recalls a childhood reading all the tabloid stories about flying saucers and alien abductions, so that when he went to college, he was already a true believer. He decided to study astronomy so that he could prove the existence of extraterrestrial visitors. But when he subjected his beliefs to the scientific method, he was disappointed. He writes, "After misapprehended natural events and hoaxes and psychological aberrations are removed from the dataset, is there any residue of very credible but extremely bizarre cases, especially ones supported by physical evidence? Is there a signal hiding in all that noise? In my view, no signal has been detected. There are reliably reported cases that are unexotic and exotic cases that are unreliable. There are no cases, despite well over 1 million UFO reports since 1947, in which something so strange that it could only be an extraterrestrial spacecraft is reported so reliably that misapprehension, hoax, or hallucination can be reliably excluded. There's still part of me that says, too bad." But hey, why listen to Carl Sagan and the entire rest of the scientific community when you can create yet another government program to study the same thing again and get the same results again?
It's part of a much larger series of stories concerning a government program called AATIP.
Okay, so John's description of this government program is pretty accurate. I mean, all he gets wrong is the name of the program and the director of the program. Also, he leaves out the name of the place, the researchers, the source of funding, he gets the timeline backwards. Okay, just a few things. But he was probably pressed for time. I mean, he only spends 3 minutes covering this program. But just for fun, let's see if I can take that same 3 minutes and actually tell you the whole story. And go! Robert Bigelow is a billionaire and also a huge fan of all things paranormal. Over the years, he spent millions of his own money trying and failing to prove that aliens, ghosts, and monsters are real. In 1996, he purchased Skinwalker Ranch in Utah based on rumors that the previous owners had seen UFOs. He invited a bunch of paranormal experts out to study the ranch and made it clear that anyone who didn't regularly report paranormal sightings would be off the team. So, they all regularly reported stories about strange things they thought they saw in the dark. He also offered a cash prize to anyone with hard evidence, and that money went unclaimed. Nevertheless, in 2005, a couple of those guys put out a paperback of their stories. It contained no photographs and no evidence, just lots of wild stories about ghosts and werewolves and Bigfoots and UFOs, and some people actually believed it, including one James Lakowski, a paranormal enthusiast who also happened to work at the DoD. He reached out to Bigelow, and they teamed up with Rob's buddy and big-time donation recipient, Senator Harry Reid. The three of them hatched a secret program to spend $22 million of taxpayer money to hunt for UFOs, ghosts, and monsters at Skinwalker Ranch. It was a secret from the government, because in order to get funding, they had to pretend it was something else. So they made up a bullshit program title, Bigelow invented a bullshit aerospace company, and they passed the whole thing off as something legit that had nothing to do with UFOs, monsters, or Skinwalker Ranch, honest. Several years and $22 million later, the program amounted to absolutely nothing. They of course failed their pretend objective, conducting so-called technical studies of advanced lift propulsion and weaponry, and they also failed miserably at their covert objective, having captured exactly 0 photographs of UFOs, ghosts, werewolves, or Bigfoot. Although Legasky did claim he once saw a giant dino beaver on the ranch, but he forgot to take a picture of it. In a desperate attempt to stop the program from being shut down or worse, embarrassingly exposed, Senator Reid petitioned to have AAWSAP classified as top secret under a different made-up name, AATIP. This request was officially denied, and the DoD tried to avoid further humiliation by quietly pulling the plug and sweeping the whole thing under the rug. It's just a good thing for these guys that Edward Condon wasn't still around with his horsewhip. And that would have been the end of it, except for one man, Lou Elizondo, also a UFO buff, who also happened to work at the DoD. Although he was never part of the AAWSAP program, he was bummed that it got shut down, so not part of his actual job, but in his spare time, he dug through old Navy footage looking for anything weird, and he found 3 blurry blob videos. He went public with them, announcing himself as the director of AATIP, and in 2017, UFO activist Leslie Kean wrote a story for the New York Times in which she falsely claimed that AATIP was a real program, Lou was the real director, and she tried to sell it all as legit by conveniently leaving out everything about Skinwalker Ranch, ghosts, werewolves, Bigfoot, dino beavers, and yes, wormholes. You got this part right, John, so I'll let you take it from here.
They also composed a paper on traversable wormholes that includes this actual illustration, which, and this is crucial, features a man saying hello to a dinosaur.
Although, in my humble opinion, John really missed this opportunity to talk about dino beavers. I mean, what could John Oliver not love about dino beavers? In the next section, he waffles between breathlessly sharing eyewitness testimony and then noting that eyewitness testimony can be unreliable. Hey, good for him for reading the Skeptical Inquirer, or at least mining quotes from it. And then he brings up the Pyramid UFO video and even attempts to debunk it.
A Navy official offered a pretty banal reason for it.
Some type of drone resolves itself through the night vision goggles onto the SLR camera as a triangle.
Now, not to be pedantic any more than usual, but that explanation is only half wrong. But if we turn again to intrepid debunker Mick West, he tracked down the exact night vision lens with triangular iris, pinpointed the location of the Navy ship and the flight path of commercial aircraft overhead, noticed that the flashing pattern matches that of a Boeing 737, and the rest of the lights in the video match the constellations in that night's sky. The grainy sparkles are just ordinary camera sensor noise, although if you look closely, one of them could be the door falling off the airplane. And then, John turns his attention to NASA's explanation of the Navy's Go Fast video, where they calculate that its actual speed was...
Well, that was boring as fuck.
Really? Just get bored and quit right before they reveal how fast the Go Fast was going? It was only like 10 more seconds into that video, and they give the big answer. Like, here it is.
This object moved about 390 meters in 22 seconds. And that corresponds to a velocity of just 40 miles per hour. And so that's a velocity that's consistent with wind speeds at 13,000 feet.
So there you have it. Compared to the speed of the 40-mile-an-hour winds, whatever this object could possibly be was floating along at the relative speed of 0 miles per hour. So we're getting near the end of John's video now, and you know, aside from the 1 or 2 dozen little details, he really hasn't done that bad overall. He ends on something that we can totally agree on. Maybe we're actually in the same camp after all. So, remember Jimmy Carter's UFO?
And I still don't know what it was.
Well, now John is finally getting back to these big unanswered questions.
Are we alone in the universe? What is that I just saw in the sky? And for the final time, where actually is my snake?
Yes, John, that's the big question that everybody wants to know on a show about UFOs.
It's because I genuinely do not know where it is. That is our show. Thank you so much for watching.
Yeah, that's the end of the show. After asking big questions and calling for serious inquiry, he just drops the ball like I'm
a fucking idiot.
Thank you. I mean, what happened here? He either didn't do enough research to just scroll down the page on Wikipedia, or he did set it up planning on a big reveal, but they cut it for time. Either way, it's really disappointing because people deserve serious answers to these legitimate questions.
It's really disappointing because people deserve serious answers to these legitimate questions.
You said it, not me. Well, I guess, fine, I'll do it. You do deserve answers, so here goes. The unidentified object Jimmy Carter saw in the sky was... Oh, sorry. That's all the time we have for today. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Just kidding. I'll tell you the answer. And I don't care what John says. I don't think it's boring to solve mysteries like this. And as any good detective can tell you, details matter. So, Jimmy Carter saw a UFO here in Leary, Georgia on January 6, 1969. He said the time was approximately 7:15 p.m., and it rose in the west about 30 degrees above the horizon. He recalled it was a hazy blue light that appeared to get brighter and closer, turned red, then faded away after a few minutes, leaving him wondering what it could have been. Is there any earthly technology that could possibly cause such a phenomenon? Well, turns out there is.
A space experiment that should be visible.
Launching a small rocket from NASA's Wallops Spaceport in Virginia, which will dispense soft drink-sized canisters of colored vapor to create clouds of green and red visible to people on the ground. The artificial cloud will be created 96 to 124 miles up in the ionosphere, giving scientists a glimpse into how highly energized particles interact with air molecules. But the clouds won't last long.
Those sorts of atmospheric tests have been going on since the 1960s, and it turns out that just such a rocket was launched from Elgin Air Force Base on January 6, 1969 at 7:35 p.m. It contained barium powder which, when exposed to the sun in the upper atmosphere, turns green, then bright red before dissipating after a few minutes. Viewed from Leary, Georgia, it would have appeared about 30 degrees above the horizon, west by southwest. This mystery was solved because an astute retired worker at the Air Force Base heard Jimmy Carter's story and connected the dots. He looked up the original launch records and sent them to the president and got a reply back thanking him for the most accurate and convincing explanation, which is now archived at the Jimmy Carter Library. And another UFO story goes up in smoke. So, everybody loves a good mystery, and letting your imagination run wild with far-fetched possibilities can be really fun. But doing solid detective work and figuring out the real answer can also be fun, and ultimately, I think, more satisfying. I want to close with another quote from Carl Sagan's The Demon-Haunted World, and seriously, read this book. By and large, scientists' minds are open when exploring new worlds. If we knew beforehand what we'd find, it would be unnecessary to go. In future missions to Mars or to the other fascinating worlds in our neck of the cosmic woods, surprises, even some of mythic proportions, are possible, maybe even likely. But we humans have a talent for deceiving ourselves. Skepticism must be a component of the explorer's toolkit, or we will lose our way. There are wonders enough out there without our inventing any.